What's up, everybody? I'm Nathan Graham Davis, and I'm going to re-break in as a Hollywood screenwriter. Okay, so re-break in. Once upon a time, I was a screenwriter, repped by a legit manager, had a big option, took meetings at studios all over town, had calls with agents of movie stars, worked on projects for big-time producers, and then after a couple years, I walked away from it all. Turns out, Hollywood can beat the shit out of you if you're not ready for it. And I was too naive to know that the bad news and the false starts and the gross politics are just part of getting movies made. Well, in the 6 years since then, I've tried my hand at a couple other things. Co-created a graphic novel called Malice and Mistletoe with artist Jack Purcell, who's worked on Batman and things like that. Did a ton of short stories, tried my hand at a novel, doubled down on my career in banking where I've learned a lot about business and leadership and discipline. Had a great time watching my kids turn into really cool people. But 2020 has really forced me to take a look at my priorities, and you know what? I want to make movies. To do that, I'm going to need to break back in all over again. And to do that, I'm going to need a new script. So here's the plan. Over the next 6 months, I'm going to immerse myself in this world again, come up with a killer idea, outline it, draft it, get feedback from friends, rewrite it, get even more feedback, rewrite it again, get even more feedback, and then polish it into 100 pages of glistening perfection. I'm going to document all of that, cluing you in as I struggle through plot holes and character and dialogue and interviewing people in the industry to get their insights along the way. When I'm done with this script, I'm going to query managers and producers just like it was the first time around. I might even submit to a couple contests or the blacklist. Yeah, I've still got a few friends I could ask for referrals, but you know what? I think this will be way cooler and more interesting and more valuable if I try and do it cold. Before I even get started, I'm going to tag in Jeff Willis, who's an executive over at Marvel. In the 15 years that I've known him, he's worked at production companies and everything from development to legal, and he's now a produced screenwriter, so it's fair to say he's in the know.
Hey, Nate.
Hey, how you doing, Jeff?
Good. How are you?
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. How have you been?
Doing good. I'm in our attic, which I've been building out as a writer's studio, and it's super cool. Except being September in Massachusetts, I thought I could maybe avoid spending money on an AC this time around, and I'm severely regretting it right now. It is very hot up here. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Just still getting used to the whole parenting thing, and probably the weirdest year to have taken that on.
But dude, it's so exciting. Like, I couldn't be happier for you too. I mean, when you think of the type of people who should be parents, you two definitely come right to the top of that list. So that's super cool.
That's kind of you to say, because there are certainly days when we wonder about that.
Why is parenting hard?
It's a little more challenging than we thought it would be.
Yeah, it's a trip, man. But it's also like the best thing in the world. So now I'm the father of a kid who's been alive for a decade. Not much like that to make you recognize you're getting old. So on that note, I'm kind of like, I think I want to be a screenwriter again. So
it's funny how it seems to come around. I like we talked about before, I thought I was done too, and then I came up with an idea, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this again.
Yeah. So what are you working on right now? Obviously you've had some real success working with Bob, but what are you working on right now?
Yeah. So Bob and I are starting another script. I'm working on a pilot, and then kind of out of the blue, Mike Lee called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to write something together?" So I'm working on one with him too.
Awesome, man. That's a name I haven't heard in a while too. That's cool. How's Mike doing?
Seems like he's doing pretty well. I haven't seen him in a while either. We just talked and got caught up a month ago, because he was just like, "Hey, I haven't talked to you in forever. Let's catch up." And we chatted for a while, and I think he's got a couple of ideas that he wanted to kind of like talk through. So we started workshopping something together. So it's we're both busy, so we're taking it slow and kind of whenever we get a chance. But yeah, it's been nice to kind of get back into it and start thinking about writing again, because I haven't done any in a really long time.
Yeah, I'm excited to just throw myself back into it. I've been writing tons of short stories and stuff, but it's been a while since I've written a screenplay. So
yeah,
it's been a while. So, when I had posed like in advance the questions that I had for you, you kind of pushed back a little bit, and you're like, "Why are you asking me all these basic newbie questions?" And I thought that was pretty interesting and something worth talking about. So obviously, like, I want this to not just follow my process as I'm going through writing a new script and trying to break back in as a screenwriter, but also I want it to be a valuable resource for newer writers. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of discuss why you felt that might not be the best thing to talk about in whatever time we have together right now.
Yeah, I mean, no, like we were talking about. I mean, I think the thing is, like, there are so many resources out there for, aspiring writers, especially writers that are starting from zero, right? Like that's what you buy the books for. That's what you take courses for. That's what you ask on internet message boards and Reddit, and back in the day, shop talk writers on IMDb.
Sure.
Those are the questions that we would get. And I mean, you and I met on that message board on IMDb. That was it was almost like clockwork. Like every day there would be someone coming in saying, I'm going to write my first script. What software should I use? Or, like I've got a great idea. What do I do now? And it's funny because like those do tend to be perennial questions, because there are so many people that are looking to start from zero. But it's also one of those things where but because there are so many people, there are already so many resources out there for them, that it gets really hard, because then it's like the question is, do you just become another packaging of that same information? Or do you have an opportunity to offer something new? And the thing that appealed to me so much about your project is, I thought that for someone that, has had some limited success like you have,
yep.
and then is out of the game, whether by choice or by, just the circumstances, you've been out of screenwriting for a while, and that's in large part, family stuff. There's a lot of reasons, but, I think that's a true experience for people who are even seriously pursuing their screenwriting, where they could go years without ever making a difference or getting to a different stage in their career and feeling like they're just treading water. So the thing that really appealed to me about your pitch for this is kind of like that idea of someone coming into this as hey, I'm a screenwriter that, had a little bit of a flash in the pan, like success a ways back, but now I'm trying to figure out how to get that momentum again or get back to where I was. I think that's something that's more unique and less talked about. And I think there are, compared to the number of people who would like to write a screenplay someday, it's significantly less.
Sure.
But there are certainly no shortage of people who have had an option or some interest or a couple of general meetings and are looking to take their career to the next stage. And I think that, your project has the opportunity to be representative of where they are, which is, I don't need to know the basics of, what software to use or where to get my news or something like that. I need to know what's it going to take to get back, or to get to where I want to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's part of what I'm genuinely curious about. So some of the questions that I had sounded probably really basic to you, but, I'm genuinely curious about how certain things have shifted, because it's been 6 years since I've been paid for my writing, maybe 7. It's been a while. And, in that amount of time, I'm curious, how has the market changed? How has the way people work with their reps changed? How has just communication across the industry changed? Does it matter as much to live in LA now as it did then, with the fact that, we can use Zoom so well? Maybe that's just also a flash in the pan with COVID and everybody's going to go back to normal, or is that less of a big deal? So I'm curious about things like that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've noticed over the years, and I mean, I've been in this business, almost 20 years now, is how remarkably resilient it is, and how resistant it is to large scale change. I mean,
Sure.
like the Zoom thing's an interesting idea, because there are people are definitely learning how to work remotely more than they ever have before, right? Like before, and I think this is true of any industry, but also entertainment, is, before, I think there was a real prioritization of, in person, face-to-face interactions. And now that people have been working from home for, 5-6 months, and work is still getting done, at least my hope is that, it will show people that they don't have to be, physically present in an office to effectively conduct business. But that's not to say that that's not to say it's the preferred method.
Sure.
So, one of the things that I hear a lot of from my friends that work in TV is that, writers' rooms are tough when you're all on Zoom, because there is something about being in a room with people spitballing, throwing ideas around, especially in a comedy room where it is predicated on like building on each other's momentum and jokes and things like that. So I don't think that television will ever be an industry where all of the TV writers in a writer's room are all over the country. Like, I think there will be, once this pandemic is over, a desire to kind of go back in person. But what I'm hopeful for is that people will see that remote work is possible for situations when it's warranted, so that, people who have families can work from home if it's easier for their schedule that day, or so that, it's amazing how many areas of this, of our world it would impact if, think about the traffic is terrible in LA because everyone's commuting. But if someone could say, I don't have any meetings on a Thursday and no real reason to be in the office, I can just do my data entry at home. That affects traffic patterns. That affects, like all of these other aspects. So I'm hopeful that, that our new kind of remote situation will provide a lot of options for people who, for whatever reason, find meeting in person at any particular situation undesirable. And I mean, that could even be like everyone hates I live in the Valley, but I have a meeting in Santa Monica at 4:00 because then I'm going to get stuck in traffic and it's going to take me 2 hours to get home. So there's something appealing about the idea of saying, hey, you know what, for that one meeting, I think I want to do a Zoom call. We'll just talk online. It'll be fine. And people will be more accepting of that. But as far as actual, writing profession type stuff, I think, to be a TV writer, you're going to have to be in LA, which is the same as it's always been. 100%. And feature writers can definitely live pretty much wherever, as long as they're willing to do the travel when they need to come in when necessary.
Do you see it being a tough shift when you have to go back to the office more often, or?
It's gonna be tough because, like, my wife and I were talking about how truly bizarre it's been, and regardless of the circumstances and how it's unfortunate what's going on in the world, I have never been home for this many consecutive nights of dinner in a row, because as my commute's about 2 hours each way, so I'm so used to coming home after the kids are asleep, or when they're getting ready for bed, and it's been really nice to spend that time with the family, and then I can have dinner at 6 o'clock or whatever, get the kids in bed, and then finish up some work afterwards.
Sure.
And it's going to be a bit of an adjustment to go back and go back to commuting and getting home late. So we'll see how that goes.
It's a strange time. So I know that you said that as far as things with the market go, you're a little more removed from that now than you were several years ago. But still, I'd be curious to know kind of what's your take on what the market looks like for specs right now. Has that shifted over the last few years? I mean, so for instance, back when I was writing, I remember nobody wanted to touch found footage. That had been completely played out for the last few years. And it was just don't do found footage. Zombies was also a thing that you didn't want to do unless you had some really unique, fresh take, like Mike Lee, actually. Are there things like that right now that just nobody's touching? Are there things that seem to be a little hotter, genres that are, especially hot right now? Just curious about what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough because, and there's really kind of two categories of specs that I think, we're talking about, which is, there are the low budget, produced, on a shoestring type specs that everyone has always written forever, trying to either make it themselves or, appeal to the most number of, investors, financiers, producers that you can. And then there's the everything else spec, the thing that will not get made unless you have, a major company or major financing attached. And, I think the independent low budget stuff is the same as it's always been, which is, the idea is to write something so cheap that, 1,000 people can make it. And hopefully you have better odds. So that hasn't changed too much. But I think when it comes to the larger stuff, and this could be my perspective, working at a company that deals only with its own IP inside of a larger company that also only deals with its own IP. But there really isn't much of a spec market for large scale specs anymore.
Sure.
There are a couple companies around town that can do that kind of stuff. Like Skydance, for example, has enough financing and is looking for properties that they still option stuff and develop it. And you can have more of a traditional sense of, gee, if I option a spec and then sell it and then rewrite it, it could get made, if it becomes a priority project. But there's so few of those around now because so many of the studios in particular are inwardly focused on exploiting their own IP, that it becomes almost like the advice I give most people now when they're writing specs is, look, you're either writing a spec that's, again, as cheap to produce as possible, hoping it gets made, or you're writing a spec with the intention of using it as a sample to get hired for an assignment.
Sure.
Doing a project that a studio or a larger company already wants to do, and they need someone to execute it. So, I think that, and that's not so different from kind of how it was 6 years ago when you were working on this. I mean, it was already trending in that direction, but with the success of so many of the franchises, like all of Disney's live action animation, I mean, Disney as a studio basically doesn't make original projects anymore. They're not buying specs. They're developing their animated shows for live action. They're developing their Marvel properties based on the comic books, Star Wars based on the Star Wars universe. So it's hard because these big multinational companies with a ton of IP are looking to exploit internal projects. So they're looking to hire writers to execute those, not buy a high concept spec from a writer. So what they end up doing a lot of times is reading those specs as samples to hire them onto the projects that they've already kind of earmarked for development. And that's kind of where I kind of advise writers that come to me about that kind of stuff is like, look, either write something cheap enough that it can get produced, by a lot of different people, including indies and, self-financiers, or write something with the expectation that you're not going to sell that, but you could leverage it into an opportunity to get an assignment.
Yeah, I mean, that's great to hear. I mean, it's not that different than what I remember for sure, although, maybe it's shifted even more so in that way. So Aftermath, which I optioned, was probably your $15 to $20 million spec, right? Like, so relatively low budget, but you wouldn't call that low budget. Is that also the type of thing that's really, you're not writing something in that range expecting to sell it? You're writing that as a sample at this point, or is that still kind of a realistic thing to write to sell as well?
Well, I mean, it depends. It's like it's a scale of like diminishing returns as you get more expensive, right? So if you're writing a $20 million movie, like let's say there's 100 places in town that are still places, and by places I mean companies, independent producers, financiers, anything like that. If there's a $20 million price tag on something, let's say 100 companies can make that, or 100 places can buy that and make it. But if it's 10 million, there may be 1,000 places. If it's 5 million, maybe 2,000 places can make it. So it really just kind of depends on your threshold for what you're trying to do with it. So if you're writing a $20 million budget action thriller, there are going to be significantly fewer places you can sell that than a $1 million horror script or a $2 million drama. So it just kind of depends on, like, I wouldn't say like if you write a $20 million budget or $25 million budget you'll never sell it. Like there's no automatic switch over at which point it becomes untenable. As the budget climbs, there are fewer and fewer people that can make it until you get to the point where literally there's no one that can make it at that price point short of a studio that's not buying it anymore. So, it's trying to keep it as low as possible. And I would say, as a ballpark, I mean, I think you definitely want to shoot for under 25. Under 20 million would be great. And, under 10 is probably a sweet spot.
Okay. So, back to your point about how you think that this could be a cooler series if I'm focusing more on the journey of a guy who's kind of been in it a little bit before and is trying to get back into it. I'm trying to get my foot back in the door again. Am I better off focusing on that kind of sub 10, sub 5 even $1 million movie that I can get made? Or am I better focusing on something that's going to serve as a really great writing sample? Do you have an opinion either way on that?
I think it depends on what you want to do. If you want to sell specs, you got to write specs. Yeah. If you want assignments, I think that the low budget stuff is beneficial because it serves as both. If you write a really, really great story, it could get bought or it could be a great sample. Then you truly have the most versatility in what you use that piece of writing for. But that said, I mean, there are definitely assignments in town that no one wants to hire a writer for that doesn't know how to do that kind of project. Marvel movies don't tend to hire, low budget writers because they want to know that someone can handle a large IP, big franchise, lots of responsibility. So a spec that kind of takes that scope into consideration can be a great calling card for those big, plum cherry assignments that like you're trying to get at a studio. But it's tough because again, you can't sell anything, you can't sell those specs anymore by and large. So what you're essentially doing is an audition piece, which, you know how long it takes to write a script. It takes months.
It's a lot of work.
You could spend 3 to 6 months working on something. And
I would say, most take me in that 6 range. If I'm going to get it polished with, multiple drafts, that's a 6-month job.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, so you could spend those 6 months saying, I'm going to write something. And I sure hope, Marvel, DC, pick your 5 companies really, really like it and hire me. Or you can write something, again, I tend to push lower budget because it's like, you can still send that to those 5 companies and hope they see something in the characters or the writing, but then you can also turn around and sell it to independent producers and smaller companies that do have the budget to make it. And again, for me, it's just about an economy of the, your focus and your work as a writer where, especially as, you and I both have kids now, we both have family obligations, we both have full-time jobs. And there are only so many hours in the day to focus on writing, and there's only so many scripts you're going to be able to write. So I wouldn't necessarily rule out writing some big studio type spec just to show you can do it. But I think if you're going to try to break back into this industry and you really want to maximize your chances of, getting points on the board again, mm-hmm. I think you want to write something that will, appeal in the most number of ways to the most different places.
Okay. Well, I think that's pretty good advice. So, so I should be aiming at least with this first next spec. Low budget probably makes more sense because I can make it that strong piece and show off some action and show off some character, but also, it's going to be more interesting to more places.
Yeah, there's also that, that intangible element that, it has to be something you're passionate about too.
Sure. Yeah.
You have to be able to get excited about a project. So if low budget stuff just isn't your bag, or that the best example of this is low budget horror is the easiest thing in the world to do because, it is cheap to shoot. You can make things cheaper than just about any other type of genre. But, for me personally, I don't enjoy horror movies. So trying to write a horror spec, as smart as it may be from a business standpoint, is never going to do well for me because I don't have the passion to write a good script in that genre. So, you just have to make sure that, whatever you're pursuing isn't wholly about, what makes the most business sense, but also is like something that you're going to be excited to work on for the next 6 months. And I think you're very similar to me where you have a lot of different interests. So that's maybe not as a concern, but there are truly writers out there that only want to write big budget things. If you're the kind of person that isn't into low budget stuff, or indie drama, like those aren't the things you should be writing, even if they make sense on paper.
Yeah. So passion's huge, obviously. And you kind of touched on a couple things there that were part of the reason why I got discouraged after having broken in. One was that my manager at the time really wanted me to follow up Aftermath with another straight action thriller, with a male in his 30s who, was basically just doing XYZ. And I really wanted to write something that was a little bit more elevated with maybe a sci-fi or supernatural or fantastical element to it. And so there was that, kind of like the tension of, do I stay in my lane or not? And then also, I got, it wasn't a paid assignment, but I was developing something for a producer and working on that. And I went through so many different drafts and ultimately didn't really care about the story. And it just, I looked back on the last 6 or 8 months or whatever, and kind of was like, that was a waste of my time. We're still nowhere nowhere with this. I'm not any closer to something interesting, and I didn't enjoy it, and so those were discouraging things that kind of ultimately led me to go and write Malice and Mistletoe and do something completely different for a while. And then I just stayed out of it. But now I want to get back in, and I think that passion is important. Do you see that stay in your lane thing as important, or having a specific brand as a writer, as somebody who also has multiple interests?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always a tendency for people to try to fit others into categories that they understand. So like there will always be a there will always be a desire to look for people that can kind of give you the same thing over and over again, right? And over the last few years, I've also been kind of branching into self-publishing in that arena a lot as well. And you see this a lot there too, where it's like someone does really well with like a mystery thriller type series, but they really want to write sci-fi, and the question is will my readers translate over? Will they will I keep my audience? Do they just want me to keep writing the same thing? And I think it's the smarter business thing is to stay in a lane and keep at it. But I also think that not every artist is cut out for that. I know for me personally, if I was going to do a book series, I'd probably get about 3-4 books in before I got bored and wanted to do something completely different. And I do the same thing with my scripts. I'll write something, and then my next one is usually a completely different genre than the one that I just wrote. And while it would be probably smarter to be able to market yourself as, hey, I'm the action thriller script guy, or I'm the sci-fi writer guy, author guy, I think that again it kind of comes back to the passion of it, which is like, if you're passionate about doing different things, or your creative process takes you in different directions, you need to heed those, and not necessarily to the point where you're disregarding all common sense and just jumping from project to project, but it's a trade-off, right? And for me, what I've kind of accepted is that I'm okay maybe not having as direct a path to success, because I don't do the same thing over and over again. But I'd like to think that in turn creates more possibilities, because there's different audiences for different things. So, there are places that, again, if you just want to write action thriller scripts and you're the action thriller guy and you're coming in for, like, people know to call you for those meetings, right?
Sure.
But
it makes a ton of sense if you want to work as a writer. I get that. So.
Yeah. But
I don't think my manager was necessarily wrong. I just didn't like it.
Right. But then there's also something to be said about, everyone's looking for something different. So, if you only write action thrillers, only places that make action thrillers are going to look at you. But if you also like sci-fi, then you're going to find companies that like sci-fi, and it's more of a casting a wide net strategy. Mm-hmm. So I think that, it is important to give due to the idea that, that if you're having success with something, you might want to consider staying with it, at least for a little while, to, establish yourself and take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you. But I don't think that needs to come at the exclusion of doing anything else that creatively interests you. And one of the things that I've really tried to focus on lately, and you kind of hit on it yourself with your story about the experience with the producer and kind of just constantly doing stuff and realizing you wasted 8 months. And, the hard truth is, that's the life of a screenwriter, is right. You sometimes spend a lot of time spinning your wheels or doing a lot of work and nothing ever comes of it. It's rarely malicious. It's just the way the business works, which is why I think it's really important that writers, are able to constantly be working on something that interests them. So I know a lot of writers, screenwriters, that kind of did what you did, and they work on a graphic novel every once in a while now, or a comic series, or do some short fiction, or write books, like the idea that they kind of offset the slog of doing stuff and walking away feeling like they just wasted all their time on these screenwriting projects, because that's the nature of the beast of being a screenwriter, with other ways that they can feel creatively fulfilled, has been really successful for me over the last few years. And I think for a lot of other writers too, where it's like, especially with the advent of self-publishing, like, you can put a novel out yourself now. The nice thing about self-publishing is there's no one to stop you from, just hitting fade out or the end and clicking publish and putting it out into the world. That's not to say you should without some outside input, but I found that that's a really great way for people to offset the frustrations that come with a screenwriting career, where you're constantly waiting for permission from someone else to do something, where you can find that other area of writing or that other way of creative expression that gives you that feeling of accomplishment or even sense of control that you sometimes don't have in screenwriting.
That's great advice. So we're talking about the benefits and drawbacks of staying in one lane, right? Like if you're somebody who feels pulled in multiple directions, and the benefits of being willing to explore those so that you don't get kind of bogged down in this slog, but also the benefits of sticking with it, especially, when you're kind of newer to the game, which I really will be, right? Like, so let's say I finish the script and it does well and I'm able to get repped, and, either at least it gets me some generals, if not an option, right? That's the goal with this. And it probably does make a lot of sense, if I can, to follow up that script with other scripts that are kind of in that same lane. So if I'm trying to figure out what is my next script, what is the idea, does it make sense to really focus on, all right, what's something that I could tolerate writing 3 scripts in this vein before I break off and do something wildly different? Like, is it worth putting that type of intention into what I write next?
I don't necessarily think so, because there's really no telling what that script will do for you. So, I think that, what you mentioned was really important. You need to have multiple projects, because you don't want to be that writer in a meeting where all you have is your one script, and that they say, what else are you working on? You're like, well, I haven't really thought of anything yet, or I'm still thinking about, like, they want to know that you are a writer who produces work, like who gets content written, right? So
I bombed a meeting at a New Line. It was for exactly that reason. I didn't have anything to talk about. Like, I got a general meeting at New Line, and I didn't have any idea that I was excited about, and so they weren't excited either. And I think it lasted all of 15 minutes.
Yeah, and it's hard because, again, the most common question you get in those generals is, so what else are you working on? What else are you interested in? And, the worst thing you can do is say nothing. I don't have any other ideas. But the second worst thing you can do is pitch something that they like that won't be available for months, because then they'll have forgotten about it by the time you finish writing it. What you really want is, you want to be able, like, the dream situation is, assuming they don't want to buy the thing that you're there for, is they say, what else are you working on? And you say, oh, I've got this other idea or this other script. And they say, oh my God, that sounds fascinating. Like, I want to read that too. And you to be able to, really, like, by the time you leave the meeting, from your phone, email it to them and say, hey, here's that other script you asked for. So it's important to have multiple projects. But again, I don't necessarily think that it's important to put a lot of thought into a strategy around those 3 pieces, as much as it is to make sure those 3 pieces are really great scripts, however you come up with your ideas. Because, there is, again, you can't ever tell, what kind of a meeting you're going into, or what kind of a mentality the person you're meeting with has. So you have no idea if you're going to be meeting with a, let's say, an executive in a general meeting that is looking for another action thriller script, and you're going to say, oh God, I really wish I'd written another one just like it, but slightly different, that maybe would appeal to them. Or if you're going to meet someone, say a potential rep or someone else, that is going to get interested in the idea that you have something drastically different that may be fitting another area they're looking for. And the way that this plays out, really often is, a lot of companies these days are making a lot of different content for different mediums, especially, and this was true 6 years ago, 7 years ago when you were in the business, but like, TV was starting to explode then. It's only gotten bigger since.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely TV is a way different beast. I don't live in LA right now, so I'm not even thinking about it. If that changes, then I'll probably at least look into pursuing it. But
yeah,
it's way different.
And I mean, and features are always popular and stuff. So it's hard to say whether saying, hey, I have an action thriller feature and another action thriller feature and another action thriller feature is going to be more advantageous to you than saying, hey, I've got a, action thriller feature and a sci-fi pilot and because you never know if the person that you're meeting with is going to say, you know what, I kind of liked the action thriller, but I know a guy who's looking for sci-fi, or my company's TV division needs a procedural. Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think that you can get a little too wrapped around the axle trying to game out and figure out, maximizing your chances. And really what you should be focused on more than that is just writing things that are truly great, which you have to be passionate about and interested in. So again, if you're the kind of writer that likes action thrillers, then yeah, write 3 action thrillers. Like, that's going to be great. But if you're the kind of person that has different interests, then yeah, maybe you write a low budget action thriller, then maybe you write a, slightly bigger budget sci-fi as like a spec, sample piece. And then maybe you write a TV show so that, if someone talks about, some TV or a rep also, represents TV, right? Like, you can maximize your chances by casting a wide net rather than showing expertise in one specific area.
So right now I've got Aftermath, which the option is lapsed on. So at least it exists, right? Kind of obviously harder to do something with something that's already been seen around town, although it was a while ago. I've got Continuum, which, I exhausted my referral sources on that 3 or 4 years ago. But I never queried on it really or did anything with that. So it hasn't been seen much, and it certainly hasn't gone out. I don't plan on using that to try and get out there. But so like I've got that kind of $10 to $20 million action thriller, got that $2 million contained sci-fi thriller. So should I try and hit like kind of another pocket, do you think? If I'm being strategic about what I write next, stay in one of those lanes? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that, both Aftermath and Continuum are samples you can use. And as I think you kind of realized, they're not ideal samples, but they are something. So that, again, if you have that meeting and they ask what else you have, your answer isn't a big zero. It's something else. And they may never ask to read it, and you may never want to send it to them, but at least you have an answer to the question. So I think that, again, if you're just trying to break back in, if that's your goal, if your goal is to get in as a writer again, I think that so much of this business right now is geared towards television. I think you want some sort of television project,
really? Okay.
And I mean, the good news is they're shorter to write than a feature, so it'll take you less time. But I think that, I mean, especially with there are so many streaming services coming online. There are so many, it truly is peak TV where there's so much out there. And I think that you want something to show that you could play in that arena, right? Like it's kind of like if you're trying to be, an athlete and get an athletic scholarship, in high school, like it's great if you focus on football and you're trying to get a football scholarship, but like, it's great if you play football and basketball and can try to catch someone's interest with either, if you can do them competently. And I think the same is true for writing is, TV writing and feature writing are very different in how you approach them and how you write them. So I think you want at least something in your portfolio that shows you can do both. So if you don't have a TV project yet, I think that would be something you might want to focus on.
Yeah, I don't. I've never done any TV. In fact, it's, to the point where I kind of like, can I even do this? Probably, right? But I mean, it's just, I'd have to learn new things. I'd have to learn the structure of it and how that feels and really study it and break things down. So
yeah, well, and the interesting thing about TV now too is that it's not, TV is essentially, short form for serialized content, because there are so many shows now that aren't adhering to the traditional structures of things. So like, you don't have to either write a 30-minute sitcom or a hour-long drama or procedural.
Yeah, way different.
I think the thing that's important is the interest and the focus on telling a long form story over a serialized or an episodic arc. Because I mean, there was literally, I can't remember the name of it, but I was watching a Netflix show the other day that like literally the episodes were like 8 minutes long each. So the first season was like 2 hours. You could binge watch the whole thing. So even if it's hey, I've got a limited series idea, or I've got a short form idea or something, the idea that you have something to show them that again is not focused on, because I mean, you and I have talked about the difference before between TV and features. Features are kind of the moment in time, most important event that's happening. I think you just want to have that piece that you can say, not only can I write really compelling stories about a single moment or a single event, but I can also write these kind of open-ended type things that go on for a length of time. And again, that doesn't necessarily have to be an hour-long pilot. It could be, it could be a half hour, it could be non-standard structure. Like just the idea that like, hey, I can tell stories in a contained environment, or I can tell stories in an open-ended environment is what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's really cool. Honestly, I hadn't given any thought to writing TV. My entire mindset has been getting back into features. So you think even not living in LA, and that may be true for a while. I mean, we may not move to LA, period, or we may not move for a few years, and who knows. Even not living in LA, it'd be okay to write a pilot, because obviously I guess you can still sell one. You're never going to staff it, but you could sell it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's ultimately the question is you can sell something from anywhere. The question is what you want to do with it. So, let's say you write a pilot that everyone loves, and you have a Bible so people know, what the show basically is. That then becomes a question of what you want to do with that. Do you want to just sell it and then let someone else be the showrunner and, take it and run with it? You can do that from your home, wherever you are. Do you want to, be in the room? Do you want to leverage that into your position for a writing career? Then yeah, if it's a writer's room, you might at that point have to consider moving. Hopefully that means there's a job waiting for you that you would move for. Or, in a lot of cases, like the streaming shows and stuff will look to set things up on a short scale. So it could be do you want to be involved in the show, but it's only 3 months and you're going to shoot in Atlanta and then you'll be done. And then you can go back to wherever you live. And, those are all interesting things to kind of weigh. They're all kind of flights of fantasy until someone actually has an offer where you have those options. But those are kind of the three things you can do. And again, to your point, you can sell something from anywhere. You can be anywhere in the world and say, you know what, I don't actually want to work on the thing. I just want you to buy it from me and I want to go on with my life. Like you can do that from across the country or across the world, But the question of moving to LA is really one of, is it the right decision for you, your family, your, the people you care about, and is it the right professional move? And as we've talked about before, and I'm sure you'll talk to others about, like there are real pros and cons of moving to LA. And you certainly wouldn't want to do it without a job in place, or at least a plan in place for how to support yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
awesome. Well, dude, this has been really great. I appreciate so much you taking the time and all your advice, and also pushing back on the types of questions that I had early on. Just because I think hopefully as this gains an audience, there will be some newer writers checking this thing out. If you were to give kind of like one just kind of blanket, this is what you really need to know if you're a new writer before you write Fade In, what would you say there?
I mean, I think the kind of common advice that is really popular but true is that you always have to be writing something. Like it is death to just write something and be done and think that now you're just you're waiting to sell it. There are so many there are so many dead ends. There are so many false turns. There are so many wrong roads that you can take in this business. That the idea of putting all of your stock in the one thing you've written and hoping that that's enough is unlikely to bear fruit. So the thing that I tell everyone is, no matter what your plan is, no matter where in the process you're at, whether an agent or manager, like whether a rep is considering it, whether an executive is reading it, whether you already have an option, whether you're doing a rewrite for something, hoping it gets into production, like at all times, you should always be working on something new of your own. And that's not to say you have to write every day, but like you should always have forward momentum and always be developing something new, because the eternal question that you will always be asked is what's next? What else do you have? What else are you working on? What else do you want to do? So the best advice I can give people is, don't spend all your time either focusing on one script or perfecting one thing or only doing one project. Spend as much time as you can writing new things all the time so that you can constantly be generating new content for people to consider and buy, option, hire you to rewrite on, that kind of stuff.
Sure. That's awesome. Dude, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to help. Good luck with this project. It sounds exciting. I hope that, you're able to create a resource that people are able to, use and rely on and get, reliable information. And if you need any other help with anything, let me know. I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Talk to you later.
So that was awesome and illuminating, as conversations with Jeff tend to be. If you want more of that, you can join his 6,000 Twitter followers and find him at jwillis81. Thought he made some great points about why I might want to have a pilot in my arsenal. I also liked what he had to say about what this whole thing could be. the end of the day, I'm just going to keep it as organic and transparent as I can and hope that it provides value to someone. I've got some experience and expertise, but my word is definitely not gospel. I have a lot to learn, and I plan to do a whole lot of that over the next 6 months. If you want to join me, I'll be dropping action steps into the end of every single one of these so you can see the steps I'm taking to stay on track. Worst case scenario, at the end of 6 months, you got a shitload of knowledge, you've read a ton of scripts, and you've got a spec of your own ready to go just in time for the major contests. I'm keeping it pretty basic for the first couple weeks as I try and immerse myself in this world again, but it'll quickly build from there. For this week, get involved in a community. Screenwriting can be a really lonely journey, and you're going to want to connect with other writers. You're also going to need feedback on your scripts, and you're going to want to learn from giving feedback on other people's scripts. You can do this online, you can do it in person, but with COVID, the online resources are really great to have. Check out the screenwriting community on Twitter. Everything I hear is that it's really strong. I just reactivated my account, which is @NGDWrites. If you want to connect with me there, I plan on getting involved myself. The subreddit for screenwriting on Reddit has 800,000 members. Some of the posts are better than others, but there's a lot of great content to be had there, and it's worth checking out as well. Also, Facebook has a ton of groups devoted to screenwriting, both public and private. The private ones tend to be a little bit better, but you need to get to know people in order to get invited to those. So go ahead and connect with people on Facebook and see where you can take it from there. Number 2, buy or borrow a book and plan to read it over the next 3 weeks. There are tons of these out there. None of them are the Bible, but there are definitely some that are worth checking out. One of those is Story by Robert McKee. It's a little dense, but it is just packed with good information on story and structure and narrative and characters, and you'll definitely gain something from reading this. Another really good one is Write Tight. This is not a screenwriting book, but screenwriting is all about delivering your language in the leanest and meanest way possible to get that glorious white space on the page. This will help you achieve that. Save the Cat. Honestly, there are some better books out there than this one, but this is one that everybody in town seems to read. Any general I've taken, some executive seems to bring it up. And honestly, there are some good nuggets of wisdom inside of it. It's a quick read, worth checking out for sure. Also, That's Not the Way It Works by Bob Saenz. Bob's actually going to be on the next episode of this show. He's sometimes the co-writer of Jeff Willis, who you just met. He's got over a dozen produced credits, and he's an awesome guy. This is exactly what it claims to be, which is a no-nonsense guide to the craft and business of screenwriting. So if you want a good insight into what it's like to be a screenwriter, this is absolutely worth checking out. And if you take a look at it before the next episode, it'll just give you a little bit more insight into what our conversation's about. Number 3, subscribe to a podcast or two. There are a bunch of these worth checking out. The 3 that I've been listening to lately are Scripts and Scribes, Scriptnotes, and the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith. All 3 of those will help you just kind of immerse yourself in the screenwriting world and keep in the loop on what's going on. Number 4, download an app for a news source. Deadline and Variety are 2 of the major ones. If you download one of those and just allow yourself to get a notification once in a while, you'll have a good idea of what's going on in the business. Finally, read a script. You should be doing this every single week. It is one of the absolute best ways to learn the craft. If you've never read a script before, start with ProScripts for sure. They're very easy to find. You can go on to Google and just Google the screenplay for your favorite movie and it'll come right up. Finally, I've got a challenge for you. If you end up joining some sort of screenwriting community and make a post, take a screenshot of that, email it to ngd@nathangrahamdavis.com. I'll pick a winner for the next week and send them an autographed copy of Malice and Mistletoe, signed by me and by Jack Purcell, whose is the autograph that you really want. Thank you so much for checking this out. I am stoked to be getting back into this game. I've got a ton of killer interviews lined up for the next few weeks, so be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on those. Got a question? Drop it into the comments below. I'll do my best to answer it myself, and if I can't, I'll try and ask somebody in a future interview. That's all I've got, everybody. Thanks a ton. Smash cut to black.